Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to this session. We're really excited to be spending the next 45 minutes or so talking about the changing landscape for underrepresented investors in the venture ecosystem. My name is Maryam Haque. I'm the Executive Director of Venture Forward, and I'm really thrilled to have with me today Paige Hendrix Buckner, who is the recently appointed CEO of AllRaise. And I think we both are going to be bringing some interesting perspectives and some, I think, just honest dialogue and discussion about, where the industry when it comes to having a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive ecosystem where we are today and where we sort of see things around the corner potentially, and particularly with what is going to be, a tighter market and just a tougher climate for everyone in the ecosystem over the next couple of years. So really excited to dive in. We'll, I think, get into introductions, and maybe I'll just start by sharing a little bit about Venture Forward in case you may not be aware or familiar with Venture Forward. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, but we are a supporting organization to NVCA, which is the National Venture Capital Association. And NVCA, you may be fairly familiar with. It is the public policy and advocacy group that represents the venture industry. However, NVCA launched Venture Forward to solely focus on really the topic we're talking about today, which is how can we bring more underrepresented investors into the industry, meaning more women, more people of color, more people from other marginalized communities into positions of power. And we'll kind of talk about what that really means in terms of responsibilities, check writing responsibilities and other roles, and kind of how folks get to that, to those most senior level positions. We've had a wonderful time, partnering with StartOut, and we're so thrilled that they decided to put this topic, I think, as a session today for us to dive into. And, we can talk a little bit more about Venture Forward in our programs as we get into the discussion here. But Paige, I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit more about yourself and tell us about AllRaise. Paige, I think you might be on mute.
Are you surprised that I'm on mute? We've been doing this forever. It's so great to see everyone here, and such an honor to be in conversation with Maryam because she is a rock star. So my name is Paige Hendrix Buckner. She, her pronouns. Really thrilled to be here, and just want to invite everyone who's in the space to bring your questions, ask questions. There are no stupid questions. I actually started my journey as a founder in this space. Before this, I was an elementary school teacher, and then I worked in public policy as a policy director at the county level. And so I'm really excited to pass on anything that I've learned in the past, any key insights, and anything I can share now. So I started my journey at AllRaise, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. May 9th of last year as the chief of staff. And the reason I joined AllRaise is because we are really dedicated to amplifying female and non-binary voices and accelerate their success in venture capital and tech. And that's because we want women and non-binary folks to lead, shape, and fund the future. And so what really excites me about our work at AllRaise is that we have an opportunity to change the way not only our industry works, but change the way that culture works, because we have such an incredible opportunity to impact the way that people think and behave by leveraging technology and then venture capital, which helps scale technology. So I started at AllRaise as the chief of staff and then stepped into this role as the interim CEO February 1st, and then was named the permanent CEO on April 17th. And so I've been out on a strategy tour, which is why I had the privilege of seeing Maryam earlier today in New York City, but I've been in our 6 chapter cities, Boston, DC, New York, Miami, Chicago, San Francisco are one of our home cities, just chatting with folks about what's going on in the industry and how we can really make a change to drive towards parity. So I'm very excited to be here. Like I said, started as a founder, probably a forever founder, but really honored to be in this role.
Awesome. Great to get that background. And to dive into the conversation a bit, I would love to just hit on some stats and some data. I've been in the industry for about 16 years now, and I've started on more of the, so that's really like near and dear to my heart. And I think we all, as folks in this industry, really rely on data and metrics and KPIs. So I'm going to kick off with some data that at Venture Forward. So every 2 years, we work with our partners at Deloitte, and we survey the venture industry to collect data on their workforce demographics and to collect data on like their DEI strategy and their DEI goals. And we started this back in 2016 with the goal to refresh the survey every 2 years so we can track and measure progress over time. So we did the first survey in 2016, then 2018, 2020, and last year was our 4th edition. And from that survey, we found that 19% of investment partners are women, 4%, 5% are Hispanic. And then if you actually drill down to gender, 2% of all investment partners are Hispanic females and 1% of all investment partners are Black females. So, those stats, I think when you kind of hear a bit of a punch in the gut, because you're like, why are we here? Like, why is that the case? And unfortunately, I don't think we can unpack all of that in the 45 minutes that we have here. But I think it's a good reminder, and it's important for us to continue to track this data. The good news is we are seeing some progress over time in these different areas, but it's been slow. And I think that's where we want to dive in a bit more here. I will say that we do not capture data on the LGBT community in our survey, and it's primarily because we only survey one person at a VC firm, which is usually like their HR, talent, or people person. And oftentimes someone might not feel comfortable disclosing whether they're out to their team. And so we don't have a great way to collect that data. I think we'd love to be able to capture more data on that. But, even just from the other demographics that I mentioned, like that's kind of where we are as an industry today. And, Paige, I'd love to, kind of hear from you, how do you, what do you make of some of these stats, and kind of how is the industry different than where we have been, the last several years?
Yeah, I think it's a great, first of all, I wanted to say for everyone here, if you don't know about Venture Forward and their data collection efforts, now you know, right? And it's so important because it doesn't just drive these conversations, but Maryam is also able to be in rooms where she can also drive policy decisions, which can change the way our industry behaves, right? In places where she can flex on her thought leadership and the thought leadership of the organization. So I just wanted to start there, Maryam. I think it's so important. Number two, I want to bring in another data point as we start this conversation, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, which is that when we started measuring at All Raise the number of check writers, we see that there were 9% of all check writers identified as a woman, as female. And that has now grown. The most recent data that we pulled up was 14%, but we think it's trending upwards. We'll be able to share more very soon. And so what I make of that is I think that there's some exciting progress happening. We're growing. But what's interesting is that I think it's, as we dig into which roles those folks play, I'm curious to see like where diversity is happening, right? Is it happening at the earlier stages, or is it happening for later stage? So investors who are investing in later stage companies or early stage companies. Is that diversity happening for investors who are coming in as associates or principals versus the people who are actually running checks, right? So I think those are the first questions that I'm thinking about and asking. And even when we look at the data, we are going through to figure out who's actually writing a check, right? So that check writer data that I gave you, it isn't enough to have the title partner, but it's really about who's making decisions at the firm. So I think that we're making progress, but I think where we have a really unique opportunity is to think about how we can continue to influence decision makers about the hires that they make for those people in the positions of power who are writing checks. So are you hiring women and people of color, LGBTQIA people? Are you hiring them to become check writers in your firm? Are you supporting them, specifically male allies? We've heard this over and over again. Male allies are so important. How are you showing up to help promote and hire and help people build a track record? Because if you're not doing those things, then we can't help people basically build a flywheel effect where they can get wins as an investor and then turn that into brand building, which then helps them get into additional deals, which then helps them become somebody that people want to bring to the table as an investor. So I guess what I'm thinking about is how do we build a pipeline of more talent, and how do we make sure that that talent gets to a decision-making level where they can actually move money? Because that's when you move power.
Yeah.
What do you think, Maryam? I'm like so curious about your thoughts.
No, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. So some of the other sort of nuggets that we pulled in from our data collection, and I think anecdotally we see all the time, is that the smaller and younger firms are the ones where there is more diversity. And that is, part of it is just given all of the new fund managers that have come into the market over the past few years, or people who have left maybe more established firms, maybe in a principal role or kind of a junior partner role, who have left to go start their own funds. And so I think that's interesting to sort of see that difference of sort of two ways that you kind of get to be a check writer: start your own fund, or you have your own fund where you're a check writer, or you rise through the ranks at an established firm. And we have been seeing, more diversity amongst the junior ranks at VC firms. But I think you were absolutely right, Paige, in that there's been a lot of focus, I guess, on the D and just like getting the demographics or getting someone in the door and, maybe checking that box for your LPs or whatnot. But it's so important to sort of have that support and, having an inclusive culture, there being sort of an equitable environment, fair compensation, fair fund economics, and that support on an ongoing basis. Can you talk a little bit about like how you've seen allies really been supportive and being a force for change? Because I think it's one thing to get underrepresented talent into the industry, but it has to be those current leaders who are supporting that talent and kind of helping them up.
Yeah, I think this is such a great point. And you and I talked about this, maybe a week ago, I think is when we last chatted, but retention being so important. So a few thoughts come to mind. Number one, if we think about the people who are in existing firms, not the people who started firms, so we'll separate those out for a second because I think the strategies are different. For those folks who are rising through the ranks, how are we making sure that the diverse talent that comes into the firm is getting sponsored by somebody who is a partner in the firm? And I just heard this today, Maryam. I'm trying to think if it was in our conversation or another conversation, but sponsorship was so important because if somebody comes into the firm and they don't have someone who's intentionally leading them, right, bringing them into the rooms, coaching them through what it means to be a good investor, not just to write a check, but also to help your company build their network so they can get more customers. They can think about the next round of funding that they're going to raise. They can build their team. Then you're just really learning about writing checks. And I think that's one piece of being a great investor. And in some ways, it feels like a small piece after the check is written, but the big piece is doing the work to support your portfolio companies. But in order to help build the next generation, we need to sponsor folks, mentor them as they go through that journey. And I think that's where allyship can show up. So as people come into the firms, intentionally sitting down, asking questions about where do you want to go? What are your aspirations? How can I help you? And then being not just a sponsor, but also a collaborator and an advocate so that person can show up in rooms and help close deals. So an example is a few women investors that I talked to said that male allies help them write checks well before they should have been writing checks, which really just means for them, I had a little track record, right? But this person took a bet on me and gave me the opportunity to actually jump in the ring. And then when they were talking to the founder, they said, you should really work with this investor. They're going to take good care of you, which again allows them to build a track record and relationships so they can go invest in the future. As far as emerging managers go, I think there are a few things. If somebody goes out on a limb and leaves to start their own fund, which is very hard, everyone, you are starting a company. And I heard from several emerging managers, it's even harder than starting a tech company, right? Because you have to raise enough money to deploy enough capital for it to make sense for the returns that you're trying to get. So for those folks, I think it's about helping them operationalize their business as much as possible, but also helping them understand how to manage and lead teams so they can build capacity and they can go out and do the thing that they do really well. And again, this is where allyship can show up. So people who've already established their funds, helping people who've gone out to do this, understand what it's going to take and how to do it well. And then again, lock arms with them and kind of guide them through the journey. But it also means helping that person co-invest. So for example, if I see an emerging manager, I'm a male ally, I have a bigger brand, a bigger track record, bringing that person into a deal where they have value add so that they can bring value. It's not like they're doing something nice, by the way. I think I want to reframe this. It's not like out of the goodness of our heart that can be a piece of it. It's because it makes sense, right? It makes good business sense to have a diverse cap table because we know that they have better outcomes. Companies have better outcomes when they have diverse boards, diverse founders, diverse VC firms backing them. So I think it's really on both sides. That's how allyship can show up and helping people really be their fullest selves and build a track record.
Yeah, just on the point of like the co-investor side of things, I know the diversity writer has been something that has had gained some traction in the industry. I would be curious to hear how many term sheets or how many VCs are kind of already including it. But for those who aren't familiar with the diversity writer, it's basically a term sheet clause, an optional clause that a lot of VCs have started including that says they are going to earmark or kind of reserve a piece of that round to bring in an investor, an underrepresented investor to co-invest and kind of get that, build that track record, get that exposure and, kind of allyship in a similar way. We'll talk a little bit more about sort of these creative models in a bit, but I also didn't want to, I do want to go back and maybe address one piece, which is just so unfortunately core to our industry, which are the notions of pattern matching, network effects, and warm intros. And I think those three things are so ingrained in our industry, and I think are unlikely to probably change anytime soon. And would love to just kind of hear how you're seeing, newcomers sort of navigate those structures that are just have been systemic to the industry thus far.
And just to make sure I understand, are you saying newcomers as in founders who are stepping in and getting funding from folks, or can you
I think a little bit more from like the investor side. So just thinking about folks in our audience here who might be aspiring investors and looking to break into the industry. It's if you didn't go to maybe one of two business schools or two schools, or if you don't live within a few miles of a couple of cities in this country, or you don't know someone in the industry, even that as an initial hurdle is just so hard to overcome. And it's a hard industry. You hear a lot of no's, but I guess to not get discouraged about this type of systemic infrastructure that the industry has just operated under.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are coming up for me, Maryam. And number one is I think we need to continue to tell the stories of people who've cracked into this industry and been successful, who didn't follow that pathway that we think of as like the stereotypical, I went to maybe an Ivy League school or one of these MBA programs, which are all valid and good. And I have so much respect for people who go through those experiences, but there are people who bring significant value who didn't follow that path. And just this morning, one of the conversations we had is that increasingly, especially underrepresented people, we are following different paths to get into this industry. And so telling those stories then makes us all realize it's not different. It's normal to have very different paths into the industry. So that's one. But I think the second part of that is the more that we can elevate stories of people's success who didn't take that route that maybe we might all think of when it comes to like a stereotypical VC or venture-backed founder, the more that we can change the stereotype about who is and isn't successful in this role. And so what I found super compelling is that if you look at, even if I just step back and think about gender for a second, Harvard Business Review found that VC firms with female partners, 10% or more, had 1.5% higher fund returns and 9.7% more profitable exits. And what's interesting to me about that stat is that if you were to dig into it more, you would realize that this is a shocking stat considering the amount of check writing positions that women have, right? And the amount of funding that goes to women founders. Though the data about women founders is also really exciting. They use less capital, right? They're more capital efficient. They have to do more with less, which is the reason why they're so capital efficient. So I guess what I'm saying is that wouldn't be as shocking if we change what the stereotype is. And I think you change the stereotype by telling stories about who is. So for example, in this case, it might be like going in and looking at those women and finding out what are their paths? How did they get here? I'm hearing so much, and we talked about this morning as well. I'm hearing so much about women operators who are jumping into venture capital and the value that they bring to firms. So they didn't follow that traditional route. They decided to go and be a founder first and then jump in and become a check writer, for example. So again, I think the more we can tell stories and provide I guess, a name and a face to the big data sets that we're gathering about why diverse investors are so powerful and successful. I think the more we can change people's behavior. And I would say for everyone here in the audience, if you're hoping to crack into the industry, go talk to a bunch of people from a bunch of different backgrounds. And if you don't see anyone like you, come back to this network and ask them if they know someone, because chances are there's somebody out there that you could identify with in some way who could help answer some of your questions. But you are welcome here. I would just want to say that you are welcome here and we need you if you want to enter this space, because you have a unique POV that makes you the right person to see the next market opportunity that other people just simply can't.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's where we're really optimistic and I think excited about what the potential is, or the potential to unlock more innovation, more returns, more impact. The venture industry has already been so impactful over the past several decades, and it's been one that hasn't been inclusive. And can you just imagine if we have more people from all walks of life who are bringing in different perspectives to fund the next big thing, the fund innovation? I mean, it's exciting to think about, and I think we're definitely all share the vision that that's a really powerful new world to, I think, unlock in this ecosystem. I know we probably have a mix of like investors and founders in the audience, and we've talked, I think, maybe a little bit more on the investor side, but the investors do have so much power into where capital is getting deployed. And we see time and time again that data shows that women are more likely, or female investors are more likely to invest in female founders. We also see Black GPs have a much higher proportion of Black founders in their portfolio. And so we want to have more people writing checks that look and represent the country in which we live in, that is very diverse, to fund those those next generation of really impactful companies. I do want to talk a little bit about the LP side of things, because just talking about who has the power, right? Kind of founder, VC, and then the LPs, and I think they're really starting to take this more seriously, because they realize it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do when it comes to returns. And I would be curious to hear, kind of what you're hearing around the role of LPs and how they are driving change, but also just for VCs to kind of better connect with them.
Yeah, I think this is an awesome question. And I want to say to folks in the audience, if you're a founder and you're not sure what an LP is, so limited partner, they are seeding the funds with capital so that funds can actually go out and deploy them. And what's interesting to me is that they can drive so much of the decision making, right? So I think this is where LPs have an opportunity to say, hey, listen, we want you to invest in the next generation of great founders who are out there building for new markets. And I think what's important for LPs to understand is that our demographics are shifting in the United States, right? We are striving closer and closer to an incredibly diverse population that's going to look really different than it has in the past. And so with that in mind, you have to ask yourself, who is building that future? And are they reflective of the next generation that's going to be coming up? And so I think LPs have a really unique opportunity to invest in founders who are building for that future and can do it from a place of empathy that allows them to build faster, that allows them to build more efficiently than someone else who maybe isn't from that lived experience or that community. I think the second part that's really exciting too is that I'm hearing from LPs increasingly that they do want to invest in diverse fund managers, and they're looking for them, right? So I think this is a really cool opportunity that we have, Maryam, as organizations out there in these streets talking to folks to say, okay, great, how can we connect folks? So I just want to call out your LP office hours. I think that's amazing, giving people the opportunity to build relationships with LPs well before they need to make an ask, or learn from LPs well before they need to make an ask, I think is a huge opportunity and a huge value add of venture forward. And then the last part that I would say is we need more LPs, folks. And so if you know folks in your network who potentially could be LPs, I think diversifying the pie and growing the pie of LPs out there, limited partners who can see the future of venture capital, I think we have a really unique opportunity to, again, if people who are seeding venture capital firms understand the problems that we need to solve around diversity and see it from a place of empathy, but also from a place of profit, because that's what we do in this industry. I think it's good for everybody. So get out there and aspire to not just be VCs, but also LPs, y'all.
It's so important too, from like kind of a wealth creation perspective, right? Like a lot of LPs, they're larger institutions, but it's also just like individuals, like high net worth individuals that are funding some of the funds. And just to talk a little bit more about our program, LP Office Hours, we actually just held our 9th program yesterday, or on Tuesday in New York, where we brought together underrepresented emerging managers and connected them with LPs. And I think there are, like, the whole LP world is kind of a black box, but you are starting to see some of these sort of pools of capital that some of these maybe larger institutions are setting aside to invest in underrepresented fund managers. So some examples are like the Insight 2020 Vision Fund.
Yes.
I know Bank of America has allocated capital. JP Morgan has Project Spark. There's organizations like Screen Door, First Close Partners. And so I think there are these new models of LPs that are trying to get a little bit more creative than just more of that traditional, the traditional like foundation endowment, fund. But, Paige, we kind of talked about this earlier today, which is that some institutions are kind of segmenting perhaps like a female manager or an underrepresented fund manager, not in kind of their main allocation application, but in their impact or ESG or DEI bucket, which is unfortunate. And I think it's kind of the LPs are sort of missing the mark there too.
Yeah, I think the more that we can position investing in, whether it's diverse managers or diverse founders, we need to start positioning that more as an opportunity, the economic upside of it. And I think the stereotype about people who are from diverse backgrounds being riskier is something that we can help debunk, again, by telling stories that help people understand that you don't have to bucket this person in the diversity or impact bucket, which, by the way, those funds can go away and do go away when things get tight. And what's really important, especially for emerging managers that we're learning, is they need that fund 2 or fund 3. So if that LP only has capital for fund 1 and you go back and then they're like, sorry, we can't invest in a fund 2, and you're trying to go raise from other people, then there are questions. And this is something interesting that we've been learning about, like, well, why can't you raise from them again? Yeah. And so then it makes it doubly hard for you, right? Because it looks like you're not getting that stamp of approval again if the only place you can get money is from that impact bucket and it just goes away. So again, I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, what assumptions are we making about who is a successful investor, founder, and operator? And how can we better align those with what the data says about who actually can have big wins and what that upside can look like? Because I think when we start having a conversation from that perspective, we will start making decisions about having diverse portfolios, not as a nice to have, but as a need to have.
Yeah. I love one of the questions that I just saw when I was scrolling in the chat window, which was, are there communities that you would recommend that founders and investors tap into, like StartOut?
Yeah, absolutely. And Maryam, I'm thinking about several communities. So first of all, let me just say to everybody, I would start local first. Your local community can be so powerful. And so I live in Portland, Oregon, and in Portland, I've been part of the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network. There's a group called the Accelerate Fund. Just look locally first and see who can you connect with first. I think second, nationally, there's so many great organizations doing this work right now. StartOut immediately comes to mind. I used to be part of a group called Founder Gym, a company that helps fund underrepresented founders. The cool thing is that the Founder Gym community is still out there, alive and well. So if you haven't connected with a Founder Gym founder, the culture there is that we are building a world together and we lock arms and like all boats rise, right? So we want to help everyone be successful. I also want to call it a really great organization called Graham and Walker, and they're specifically focused on female founders. They do these amazing founder days in cities all over the country where people can come in and get access to mentorship. They get 2 meetings with investors and a community of folks, and they take really good care of their people. And then there's a venture fund on the other side of the house. So they're really impressive. Let me pause for a second. I'm going to look at my list here and tell you more. But Maryam, how about you? Who else would you say you get excited about?
So I would say, so there's the Women in VC group. There's also Transact Global.
Yep.
There is it's a conference, but it's also a community called Raise, which is geared towards emerging managers, and they help to make LP connections. I also think there are interesting communities that kind of pop up around events. So just the past few weeks we had SF Tech Week, LA Tech Week, and I think kind of trying to latch on to some of the community work that's happening around those events can be really helpful. Obviously, check out Allraise, check out Venture Forward. We are doing a lot in that space. Also, like Black VC, Latinx VC, I think have been doing some really great work. VC Familia, and then there's a new organization, a relatively new organization called LGBT VC, which has been, I think they're doing a big event next week in New York. So I think definitely would say plug into every community that you can think of. And then there's also, I know, just sector specific communities that might be a little bit more informal, and that might just be either, Twitter groups or Slack groups to connect in, but that's always a great way to maybe get a level deeper if you are really niche and focused in a specific sector.
I got a few more for you all too, from my beautiful list here. So Black Women in VC, I don't know if you mentioned them too, Maryam, but I know Black VC, you did mention. Mass Challenge is in Boston, and I think they're in Texas as well, but they specifically focus on founders doing great work. Rise of the Rest is a really cool organization that you should definitely check out. I also wanted to call out Natives Rising. They're the largest organization serving Native American folks in tech and venture capital, which is really cool. And women in VC, we talked to that awesome group today. They're 5,000 strong across the country right now. So I would say, yeah, there's some really great groups. X Factor is another one that I wanted to recommend as well. So listen, there's no shortage of people, and I'm sure I haven't met all of them yet, but I'm striving to do so, Maryam, so we can all be friends and figure out this work together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if there's anything that you might take away from this conversation is we Paige and I think are eternal optimists, and I think most people in the industry are eternal optimists. We want everyone to feel like they have an opportunity to enter the industry, break in, succeed, thrive, and have access to a community where you feel included and that you feel like you are a welcome member. And I think now more so than ever, I mean, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there probably wasn't. Maybe these types of community in the industry did feel very closed off, but I think we've just seen the industry grow from a pure numbers perspective. There's so many more people in the industry today and who are from different walks of life. There isn't kind of like that one linear path to venture anymore. You could be pretty much anyone and kind of have raised and become a successful investor or a founder. So definitely we want everyone to feel like this community in the venture world is welcoming. And if you're looking for a resource and you haven't found it, please ping one of us. I'm sure we can connect you with someone. But we do have, I think, about 15 minutes left and would love more questions. We want to make sure that we are addressing whatever you all find to be most valuable and interesting from this conversation. Again, we could probably go on for hours on this topic. We talked a little bit, Paige, around some of the creative ways that the people in the industry are getting or thinking about diversity, and what are maybe some other ancillary ways that you've seen either investors, founders, coalitions, organizations sort of approaching diversity, maybe from a little bit more of a creative way?
Yeah, I think when we stop looking at brands for approval, because I think that's what we do, right? We're pattern matching also for brands. So we can say, oh, you went to this university, they're a stamp of approval. I know that you had to be X, Y, and Z in order to get into that network. And I trust that network, so I trust you. If we started looking at distance traveled stories, I think that's a really powerful way to judge whether or not someone's resilient or has good judgment. And this is actually something that our former CEO at AllRaise and the founder of Founder Gym shared, which is, listen, if you can look at people and the journey that they've gone on, especially if it's really challenging, like they've had, we have a lot of veterans in our community, right? And so that's an incredibly challenging journey that they've gone in, and they've been, they've struggled to crack into so many industries. But let me tell you, veterans are some of the hardest working people. They're innovative. They are team players. They're resourceful. And those are all traits that we want in somebody who's in this industry, whether they're writing checks or they're on the founder side. And so I think the more that we can look at people's distance traveled story, where you started, the skills that you picked up, what it took for you to be successful in that space and how you can translate it here, the more that we can tap into the brilliance of people who might not typically check those boxes that we have traditionally used to make a decision about whether or not somebody is going to be successful in the future.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think maybe I will hit on a couple of other additional organizations or just structures that I feel like VCs are critical thinkers and they get creative, and so I kind of love it when they do get creative. I mentioned the diversity writer earlier. It seems like such a an easy thing to add a clause to a term sheet. So there's I think ways for us as an industry to get creative when it comes to just like deal documents and thinking about what we're including as sort of the standard operating principles, or kind of what are the agreements and the terms that we're doing for financing documents.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, there's, I mentioned a couple of the models earlier around like Screen Door, which was basically, it's a group of GPs, like really successful GPs who have started, they have their day jobs, but they started this sort of side fund of funds where they were able to pull in some LP capital that is probably they're too large. Those institutions would be too large to make small investments into maybe an small emerging manager. So they're able to sort of pull that capital together to invest in underrepresented emerging managers. There's also a fund that was just launched, a fund of funds, I think last week, the Historic Fund. Yeah.
That's right.
So this is a way that, so again, some GPs just pooled money together and seeded the capital for a new fund of funds that's going to help HBCU endowments get more exposure to investing in venture. And those, if you think about university endowments,
yes,
investing in venture is such a huge part of their allocations, but HBCU endowments haven't had that priority or exposure or I think just that access. And so, I think that's going to have perhaps term effects of just bringing more venture activity and interest beyond just the endowment level, but to the broader university side of things. There's also First Close Partners, which they have kind of similarly set up, funds that are solely for investing in underrepresented emerging managers. I think they've, in just 2 years, made 100 commitments. They aren't anchor investors, but I think it's going to take, I think change is going to come from so many different places. And it's really great to see, I think, some of the investors or people who have been successful in this industry who realize that if we just wait around for people who are entering the industry to make their way up to partner level, we should definitely celebrate and champion that, but we got to find other ways that we're helping to affect change. And I think it's going to take a lot of these more creative avenues.
Yeah, I think it's both and. I think you're spot on. And I love the creative mechanisms that you just shared. I think the more we can tell those stories in places where people might not hear them too, that would be great, right? So we've talked about quite a bit on our team. Where are all the places that we could show up in pop culture to tell these stories so that investing becomes normal and people who might not normally enter the industry can come into the industry? So that's another opportunity, I think, to diversify the industry, because there's so many programs and funnels like business school, right, that funnel folks into this industry, or banking and finance, where they also don't have a really diverse pipeline. So how can we make it easy for people who are in like psychology and sociology programs? We've talked to a couple of investors who are like, I use those skill sets way more than my finance skill set, especially at the early stages. And a couple of examples I've seen are in college programs where people get an opportunity to start writing checks. So somebody has given them a chance to start testing out what it feels like to be an investor before they get into a VC firm and test their investment judgment and build their investment judgment. So I think those are other opportunities as well. So.
Yeah, the Scout program too. I think that's a relatively new model that I think is a great way that firms are giving access and exposure to newcomers to have some of that capital to invest, but also sort of sit next to a partner and kind of understand the investing side of things. I love that you mentioned sort of that pop culture and like the visibility aspect to this. It's crazy to think that this year was the first year the Midas list had a Black partner.
This part, wild, right?
Which is like crazy, but to kind of see those success stories, or I remember when Stitch Fix went public and Katrina Lake was ringing the bell with her her baby in her hand, and it was like such a foreign picture, meaning like nobody had ever done that before. And I think when you sort of see these successful investors and founders sort of breaking our stereotype or the mold of what we think is a successful investor and founder, I think that is going to make a huge difference in sort of how we all think about who can be in this industry and who can be successful.
That's exactly right. I mean, seeing those images, seeing Adeyemi on that list is just so powerful. And I know also so many people in those positions, and Adeyemi in particular, feel such a great sense of responsibility for basically serving as a role model and helping blaze a trail. And I know so many other folks do too. So it was really exciting to see him on the Midas list. And I'm thrilled to see more folks on that Midas list for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have a couple more minutes, and we'll probably wrap up here soon. Paige, any parting words of wisdom or thoughts that you would have, advice for this group of again sort of a mix, I think, of investors and entrepreneurs that are perhaps kind of navigating this challenging industry and this challenging climate the next couple of years? Any words of wisdom you might have for them?
Yeah, so I would say that if you are a diverse VC in a seat right now and it feels really tough, reach out and ask for help. We want you to stay in your seat. We want you to be successful. And please, of course, care for yourself. And if that isn't your path, that's one thing. But if it is your path and you are struggling and you feel alone, reach out to one of our organizations. Let us know so we can support you. The second thing I would say is for the founders who are on this call right now, I want you to dream as big as possible. Be ambitious when you show up to meetings with investors. Do not contort yourself to fit into other people's expectations, because what you don't want to do is show up and not be yourself and sell a version of yourself and your company that doesn't attract the right investors for you. Because I want you to find the right people, and they're out there. I've talked to so many successful founders who've raised a round that took like 200, 300 meetings, y'all. It takes a lot. It's hard. It's not easy, but you got this. So dream big, be ambitious, don't shrink, be candid, and show up as your full self so you can find the right folks to support your journey. So those are my thoughts. What about yours, Maryam? What do you think?
You know, I love that you said like be authentic. I think that's so important because I feel like whether it's your pitching or talking to an investor or to an LP, I think they really want to see and understand the true you. And that's what makes you different and will make you different than the entire sea of, you know, however many hundreds of founders and emerging managers there are out there. And so I love that you said, you know, be authentic. I also think the next couple of years are going to be, I think, a bumpy ride for the industry. And even when times are good, it's really hard to raise a fund. It's really hard to raise capital as a founder. You've probably heard several times people say you're going to get 100 no's, and you know, just don't get discouraged. But even through this challenging climate, I think there's probably going to be even more than 100 no's before maybe you hear a yes. But it's the long game, and you know, hopefully, you know, as you might be hearing no's, use it as a learning opportunity. You know, ask for feedback. You know, try to get thoughts from people who can help guide you on learning from those experiences where maybe it didn't work out. And remember, it's a small industry. Even though we are a growing industry, it's a small industry. People talk, and so even, you know, if you may not feel like a connection was super helpful or valuable, you know, who knows, that connection might be valuable or helpful down the line, because maybe it might be somebody who's a co-investor down the line, or a potential LP in maybe not fund 1, but maybe fund 3. So I would say just, you know, I guess don't get discouraged, be authentic, be yourself, and continue to learn, like try to learn from every opportunity. And yeah, I think those would probably be my 3 big things to say as sort of parting words. Paige, as one, I guess, kind of last question, how can folks get involved with AllRaise?
Yeah, this is a great question. So what I would say for folks here is please reach out to me, paige@allraise.org, and let me know if there's a way you'd like to get involved. I think the best way to get connected right now are through our chapters, because they run local events quarterly. So as I shared earlier, maybe I didn't, we have chapters in Boston, New York, DC, Miami, Chicago, and LA. And they're an incredible resource. Each chapter knows the local community. It's a mix of investors and founders and operators and resource providers. So if you ping me and let me know, I will make sure that you get connected to the right folks. And then how about you, Maryam? What's the best way to connect with you?
So we have a growing community of folks who have come through a lot of our programs. We've talked a little bit about LP office hours. We've held about 9 of those, and we're do about 2 a year. So if you're an emerging manager and are interested in getting connected to LPs, definitely be on the lookout for details for our next program. We also have a program called VC University that we run, and we have 3 cohorts a year, 300 people per cohort. And we do this in partnership with UC Berkeley. So if you're looking for sort of a comprehensive intro to venture, kind of learning the nuts and bolts of both the art and science of how venture capital works. I think it could be a really valuable course, but then it's also, we have this huge community that have now come through that course. I think about 3,000 people that have come through it. So if that's something that you might be interested in, please do check that out. And then we do a newsletter, I believe every 2 weeks now, where we're sharing ecosystem events. We share jobs. We have a job board on there, and news about what we're doing, what others are doing, to just help anyone who's trying to navigate this industry get connected and plugged in with resources that are hopefully helpful. So that's how I would recommend getting involved with Venture Forward. So I think we are like right almost at time here. I think we did really well, and just want to say thank you again to StartOut for inviting us to speak. This has been awesome, and it's really a great community that I've loved getting to know better over the past few years, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Equity Summit this afternoon.
Thank you so much. And Maryam, thank you. I'm really excited. Listen, go take that VC University course, y'all. It's awesome.
Thanks so much, Paige, for joining us, and thank you all.
Talk to y'all later. Have a good one, everyone.
Take care. Bye.